Hello and welcome to Stories of a C question mark O podcast. I'm joined today by Andy Stephenson. So welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Hello, nice to be here.
Thank you very much. So Andy is the Chief People Officer at Equiniti. And I'll come back to you in a second, Andy, just so you can just do a very quick 30-second intro as to who Equiniti are and what your role is before we get into the podcast. But I'm also joined today by Natasha, my co-host, who is the founder and CEO of Oliver Sanderson. Before we get stuck in, we always like to say this at the beginning of every podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, because we've still got a number of great guests coming up that sit on the C-suite with their lovely, authentic, inspiring, motivational conversations. So, Andy, before I ask you that very first question and I take you right back to the beginning of your career, do you want to give a 30-second intro as to who you are, who Equiniti are, what your role is?
Absolutely, although I'm slightly concerned now that you want it to be inspiring and motivating. So, we'll have to see how we get from there. Andy Stephenson. So for the last 5 years, I've been at Equiniti, as you say. Equiniti is one of the largest shareholder registration services in the world. So effectively, if you are buying and selling shares, we are controlling the underlying list that makes that work. So we do that alongside investor relations, public relations, and in the UK, we do pension administration as well. So we have around half of the FTSE as clients, more than a third of the Standard & Poor's in the US, and in the UK, we have 36 million end customers. So it's a pretty big organization, fundamentally making the world of money work, but giving people access to investments.
Brilliant. And look, great business, and we'll probably get into your role as CPO and how you've got there over the course of the podcast. But
Yeah.
Now, all of our podcasts have a theme, and today's theme is this. It's took a job rather than university. And we're gonna delve into that in a little bit because there's some fascinating parts here, including how you're now a doctor. So we'll get to that as we go through the podcast, Andy. But I want to start because kind of lots of people often get to the end of school and think they have to go on and do something. And you were very, very different. And I'm really interested to understand, where did that all start? And you know, I remember when I did, I'm going to use the word work experience. So do you want to kind of take us back to that point where you went during school out for a week to do some work experience, and what was that? And then that really interesting thing that you said to us about your GCSEs that was the start of kind of your career.
Yeah, so Lee, I mean, as many people did back in the day, and it's a shame that it's died out in a lot of places. I was sent to work experience, and it was a case of, I originally wanted to do journalism and asked to go and work for a newspaper. And for whatever reason, probably the school I came from, they said, no chance. So the school turned around and said, basically, you need to go to a shop. So I thought about which shops did I like to go to. And back in the day, I went for Dixons. So I was quite into technology. So they asked very nicely. And I found myself stood in a Dixons store. That was still quite stuffy back in the day. It was, some people called it Dixons photographic. Written on a lot of our paperwork was Dixons, the business center. And this was, big old hunking great computers and various other things and pretty stuffy salespeople. But they welcomed me enormously. And I don't really think they knew what to do with me entirely, but there was a bit of good fortune, which helps in any career, and mine started early because this was about the time that the Super Nintendo came out. And they said, why don't you just go and stand over there and talk to customers and see if you can sell any? And of course, the 15-year-old kid knew quite a lot about computer games, so I sold them all. Much to the pleasure of the people who collected the commission, because I wasn't allowed to. But I actually thought, do you know what? This is really good. You talk to people, you interact people with, and they give you money fundamentally. And so I became vastly more motivated by that environment than I did the way school was kind of set up and was much more controlling. And so I didn't then leave for 10 years. So it was a pretty
Wow.
long work experience stint. But yeah, I owe that company a lot from giving me that chance. And probably for, I was going to say, probably for younger listeners who are going, what on earth is Dixons? I mean, these days it still exists as Curry's, but
Yeah.
it's a very different environment. It used to be on the high street and pretty dynamic. So yeah, I'm well aware it's vanished.
Before I hand over to Natasha for the next question, you had a really interesting, when we spoke, you were talking about your GCSEs and you made a really interesting decision because after your work experience, having been so successful, didn't you go into like what was a Saturday job there working there? And then there was a big decision you had when it was your business, was it your business studies GCSE?
Yeah, there was basically there was a decision to make about whether I actually went along to the exam, which obviously is what people should do, and I would advocate for education, and that's the right thing. But it also coincided with the store opening day of one of the largest electrical stores in the world, and store opening days were incredibly busy. So I thought it was a vastly better business decision to go to the store opening and make several £1,000s of commission rather than it was to go along to the exam. So yes, I failed the business studies exam, in my view, by making a pretty good business decision, but not that I
Yeah.
would advocate that to anybody at all. But you know,
No.
you make your choices in the moment, and that seemed a good one. And again, with a little bit more luck, it's all worked out well in the end.
Yeah, yeah. And look, we don't advocate not going to exams. Let's be very clear, as Andy says, that they are important. But it was a good decision at the time, Andy, and obviously the extra commission, and it gave you a 10-year career at Dixons as well. So
It
so
did, and
amazing.
it was, look, it was a conscious decision.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
a straight choice between the two to go and make that choice, and yeah, as I say, it worked out well.
yeah. Very good. Natasha, over to you.
So delving into your career a little bit further, Andy, it sounds like the first 10 years was really exciting and very different, and you did some really interesting things at Dixons.
Hmm.
At what point did you decide that HR was the area that you wanted to specialize in? And at what point did you actually make that a reality?
Um, I'm not sure I ever decided that HR was going to be the thing on the way in. I think, like most people, I sort of ended up in it. And wasn't really aware what it is. So through Dixons, I worked through the ranks. I was a salesperson, but also put a lot of effort into learning how the business operated. So I would frequently volunteer for all sorts of things. So I worked in our national distribution centre, literally loading lorries through the evening. I ended up doing admin roles. I did area roles. I did lots and lots of new store opening and merchandising. Actually went off and did a city and guilds in retail merchandising. So it was really interesting in that, having made certain decisions about academic type qualifications, I found vocational ones pretty good. So I can make a pretty mean store window if I ever need to. But what I found is the further up the ranks I got, the less exciting it was. So what I found personally is when you did a big deal and you made a customer delighted and they were really happy, and you know, you'd fundamentally solved a problem for them or created them some great value, but equally you were getting well paid for that. That to me was like scoring a goal at Wembley. And as much as there was other benefits of you know, being higher up the organization and running stores, I never got the same buzz. What I did start to do is volunteer to go and help on training courses. And I started to give people hints and tips, some of which weren't necessarily in the syllabus, but they'd worked for me for a long time in real life, as it were. And suddenly people started to phone me up and go, do you know what, Andy, I've tried that and it really worked. And that started to give me the buzz again. So I then formally applied to get into training, which of course is connected to HR, but I didn't know that at the time, being honest. And so I found myself in a training function, which was in the HR department. And so that's how I first got in there. I think the interesting bit is having got in there, I started to understand what HR was. And then that's as a, frankly, pretty arrogant young person, I sat there looking at the HR department and thought, you guys really don't understand this business. I could probably do a better job at this, which was slightly crazy in some ways. But I sat in the head office in Hemel Hempstead, and I scribbled on a piece of scrap paper a list of all the things I needed to do to get the HR director's job. And that involved, I thought I needed to go back and get some qualifications. I thought I needed to go and get some career experience outside of sales and outside of HR. And actually I made the decision, looking at all the people on the senior team in that business, and made the decision I needed to leave. So I'd seen nobody in that company work through the ranks. So I thought, if I want to get back into that job, I actually have to go. And so that was kind of my list. And I then spent the next 10 years working through that list.
That sounds amazing. And obviously, during that time, what was the biggest learning that you had in HR, that if you wanted to give someone some sort of advice or a tip around that?
I think there's so many, but I will go back to the fundamental reason why I, as a person who'd been in the business and been reasonably successful, looked at the HR team and thought, you don't know what you're doing. And it's because, and actually I should caveat here, there's some amazing people were in that team, and some of them have gone on to do phenomenal things in phenomenal businesses. But at a macro level, I looked at that team at that time and go, you don't really understand the business. And I think my big tip for anyone in HR is to, not to the same extent necessarily as somebody who's been in the nuts and bolts of it for 10 years, but to a pretty good level, you've got to understand what the business does, how it operates, why the things on the ground happen the way that they do. And so my biggest tip to anyone who wants a career in HR is to get some breadth across the organization. Volunteer for things, get involved in things, and just find out how it works. And as I've got into much, different roles and more senior roles through my career, I've always tried to do that and still go, how fundamentally does this work at the base level?
So, Andy, taking up further from there, obviously there's something quite exciting in your story and your journey. The same headhunt conversation 7 times, with you actually saying no every single time. So why did you say yes on the 8th attempt? And tell us a bit about that situation, because it's actually quite inspiring.
Yeah, so this is a bit later in my career, when it was my kind of first role that ended up being my first CPO role. And I'd been working through my list, and I'd been off and done various different jobs and careers. And I found myself in Vodafone, which is a fantastic organization. And I was doing a really good, what I would call proper L&D, proper HR job. And really working with a lot of the teams in the retail division, but a lot of the consumer division, and was in a great team and was loving it, and big global organization. And a headhunter called me and said, would you like to come and work for DFS Furniture? And it's like, no, thanks. And thought that was the end of it. And then they phoned me again. And, and in my mind, and again, I think people will be pretty familiar with it. I thought half price sale, interest-free credit. And I also spent a lot of my time thinking, sofas, they're really boring. Why on earth would I want to go and do that? As I said, I'd been motivated by technology from an early age. I was in Vodafone, one of the best British technology success stories. But the headhunter just kept phoning. And, I eventually said, you're not getting this message, please go away. And they said, no, you're not getting the message. We're going to keep ringing till we meet you. And so I went off to meet Lord Kirkham, who set up and founded DFS in 1969. And in typical his style, despite being a billionaire retailer and absolutely one of the best retailers in the country, he's very down to earth. And we met in McDonald's in Doncaster. And I think within 30, 40 minutes of meeting him, I knew the business was pretty irrelevant. I wanted to work with him and for him, because the amount you could learn being in his sphere of influence was just immense. But the interesting bit is I kind of did ask, why were you guys so desperate to talk to me? And it came out that he'd been talking to some people from other retailers about, do you know any commercial people in HR? Because in his view, many weren't. And Lord Calms, as he was until he sadly passed, but Sir Stanley, as I knew him, had been the Dixons chair. And he'd thrown my name out as here's a commercial person in HR. So quite ironically, having spent 10 years going off and doing qualifications and all sorts of things, and of course they massively helped. But the actual connection that got me into my first big job, as it were, was right back from the start of my career, and being good at sales and good at people things. So yeah, it was really interesting.
That's really amazing. And obviously you've achieved so much during that time. So I'm going to hand you over back to James, who'll go into the next part of the questioning.
Yeah. Thank you, Natasha. So interesting you bring up that over the years you'd done further qualifications, because I just want to kind of loop this back to right at the beginning of the podcast when we talked about you made the decision not to go on to do further education and actually get a job. But subsequently you've moved into HR, and obviously through that process you've done a master's. And the one thing I want to pull out is now you're a doctorate, right? So, and you got this at DFS, kind of, and I'm not going to say anything more than that. Do you want to share with everyone kind of what happened there? Because it's amazing. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, I mean, I say often I accidentally got a doctorate. It was far from planned. So yes, I had gone through and I worked through qualifications. I started off with, as I say, I did an MVQ at Dixons. I then did further MVQs and worked up, and had got a master's by the time I got that first big job, as it were. But in DFS, I was, in the 7 years I was there, I was fortuitous enough to be offered lots of opportunities, one of which was to have the chance to lead on customer experience. And it was a pretty wide open remit in that it needs fixing. We want you to do it, sort of do whatever you want. But the one caveat that the CEO and the board gave me was that they wanted the measure to be Net Promoter Score, NPS. And so that was kind of the one fixed bit. Now, we went off and we worked with various partners and we built an NPS measurement system. But the bit that really intrigued me was it's sort of well known that if your customer service goes up, that your sales go up. But I wanted to know exactly how much. And so, if we put an enormous amount of effort in, or if I'm going to the board and the exec to ask for money, how do I quantify it? What value of customer service improvement, delivers the result out? And so I asked the people who did the surveys for us, and they kind of didn't have an exact number. They could show lots of correlations, but it wasn't exact. So I then went to the US, to the people who invented NPS and collected the NPS certification in America on a training course. And that didn't teach me either. Neither did any of the people on the course know the answer. So in the end, I thought, you know what, I just have to work this out myself, which is easier said than done. So ended up working with a team of people at the University of Staffordshire. And collectively, we ended up publishing a paper that was in the British Academy of Management conference and won Best Paper for Marketing, where we had a formula that effectively took DFS's customer experience score and spit out a accurate predictor of like-for-like sales. And to my understanding, that is still the only peer-reviewed paper that actually you can flow through the mechanic and say, this is what you'll get out of it. And then, that was then pretty much the bones of a doctorate. So, it was said to me, you just need to write it up, which sounds so simple. And about 4 years later, I think, it was finished and I finally graduated. But, it was fundamentally an accidental byproduct of work that got me into that place.
Wow. And I think sometimes it's fascinating, and I could probably talk to you about this for hours, Andy, because it's like sometimes we take output as given without understanding how we actually get there. And there are lots of examples. MPS is a good example, but there are lots of examples of where we take data and we look at data and we go, oh, it says this, without necessarily understanding the mechanics that sit behind it. And therefore, it can take decision making sometimes down the wrong route. So fascinating. And yeah, that small task of just writing it up, what was it, 10,000, 15,000 words or something crazy?
100,000.
Oh, there we go. You see, even bigger.
Yeah, it was quite a lot of writing, to say the least. But yeah, it's I'm really proud of that achievement, even if I didn't
Yeah.
necessarily ever in life set out to do that. And yeah, it's pretty cool. But equally, I'm also well aware. I presented at a CIPD conference yesterday, and my title was flashed up as doctor, which is correct and right. I'm allowed to. But as it was a wellbeing conference, I felt the need to point out that my ability is saving spreadsheets, not lives. So
Oh, very good. And look, you said right at the start, you've obviously your career's moved on from DFS now, and you're the CPO of Equiniti,
yeah.
And maybe you might want to touch on some of the amazing things you've done at Equiniti, because again, when we talked, you've shifted that needle and that dial forward from a whole host of different things. But you touched earlier on when Natasha asked you about kind of what was it that you would give people feedback on, and it's that commercial piece. Clearly,
Yeah.
at DFS, there's that commercial piece that came through with your MPS work you did. Is that something that you've continued to do, and it's really helped you to move things forward at Equiniti as well, or is there other stuff there that you've done that you'd like to sort of showcase and share that might inspire others?
Well, I think both are intertwined. So I think there's a lot of things that we've done that if you were looking through a what I would call a pure play HR lens, then people would go, that's great and that's fantastic. But I can honestly say everything we've done has had a commercial lens to it, because actually I make no apologies for the fact that good people practices are good for business. And the two things go hand in hand. The Equiniti, when I joined here, it was the kind of in mid-pandemic. People were working from home. I got interviewed by the business on Teams, so never actually went into an office, never saw a person. And of course, it's a business to business organization. So it's not like you've seen it on the high street or been around. So I had to make all the judgments off a screen as to whether to join the business. And it's an amazing organization. It can trace its history in various forms back to having customers 188 years ago, which is, that's a fantastic heritage. And it was doing a great job for customers. It was getting good customer feedback. It was reasonably big in its market, but it was doing a poor job for its employees. So it did do employee engagement surveys, but they were in some of the lowest percentiles that Gallup actually measured. So it was disappointing in that case, and therefore you had colleagues that were leaving. There was a reasonable amount of turnover in there, and so there was clearly some brilliant people, because there always is in all businesses, but at an overall level, its HR function had somewhat lost its way. I think they'd had 5 chief people officers in the 5 years prior to me rocking up. So, it needed some love and attention. And first thing that you need in that scenario is a good CEO to back you. I was very fortunate that there was a new CEO coming in who one, gets the people agenda, 2 is a good advocate of it, but 3 then just gets out of the way, and that's really, really useful to have. And you can't get enough of that. And then over the years, we've been transformative. So we are now independently assessed by the Top Employers Institute as the 4th best workplace in the US. We are the 6th best in the UK. We are upper quartile in India. There are substantive locations. So, we're not perfect. We're not the very best, which we would aspire to be, but we've made stellar process, really. And within that, we've done things like we've become one of only, less than 20% of companies that has full pay transparency. So we share our bands through the organization. Our gender pay gap has dramatically improved to be, better than our sector average by quite some margin. We have employee engagement across the organization that's upper quartile. We measure engagement every single month. We get 80 to 90% of people around the globe responding every month. And before anyone in HR listening to this panics, that's not a cottage industry of HR people going out and harassing people and motivating people and having pizza parties to fill in surveys. It is genuinely, if you make a survey easy to access, but most importantly, that people realize you're going to do something with it, then they give you their thoughts freely. And we are very grateful every single month that people give us the insights to be able to make sensible people decisions across the organization. We won the CIPD award for best wellbeing strategy. So very focused on both physical and mental health, and getting people out and getting people well. And we actually measure health outcomes. So we know people in our organization are fitter than they were before we started to do some of the things that we did. And going back to the point about commerciality, we also won a CIPD award for people analytics, because what we do is measure all the initiatives we do and go, does it deliver return on investment? And what's interesting is, despite all the things that we've done and all the things we've achieved, if you were to work on a list of inputs, I'd say we probably do 50% less things now than when I joined. It's just the ones we do are ones that make an impact and we do them well. But we had a huge array of flexible benefits and training courses and all sorts of programs that frankly a tiny niche of people were using. So we just simplified an awful lot of what we do, and do less, do it well is for me really important.
Brilliant. Yeah, sometimes less is more, isn't it? And keeping it simple that shows the value that you're actually adding to your employees has significant impact, rather than trying to do 100 things. And as you say, do 100 things badly or 10 things really well. There's only one outcome, right?
Absolutely. And, we've partnered with some major organizations, and what you tend to find is if we do less things well, when we do launch it, it gets great take up. So, we launched salary sacrifice electric vehicles into the organization, which lots of people do. Good for the environment, good for our colleagues. We worked with Octopus as our provider. Our take up was way higher than they were expecting us to get. We provided free health checks and a free version of a health plan to everyone in the UK and the US with a partner of Vitality. And again, we worked very well. We worked very hard with them. But again, we got a much bigger sign up than they would typically see from similar sized customers. So people trust us that when we put something into the organization, that it will have been well thought out, that it will be well delivered, and it will add value to them. And so they then pull the things that we provide out to them without us needing to push things down their throat.
Brilliant. Natasha, over to you.
So, Andy, it's really interesting, and you really covered some amazing parts of your career and your life and everything. You talk about well-being. So, sort of before we kind of go into hints and tips, just to have a bit of an understanding, how do you, as a father and a husband and a CPO of one of the biggest brands in the world, with all the traveling that you do, how do you manage and balance your well-being and your family, that sort of balancing your family life as well? Because that's, a big part of being in the C-suite.
Yeah, it is. Luke, it's a bit of my career that I got spectacularly wrong early on. So, in these podcasts, you tend to focus on all the positives in life, and particularly given the brief from James at the start to make it motivational, inspirational. But let's, if we look at the bit of my career we skipped in the middle, the bit between me leaving Dixons and eventually ending up in DFS, I did lots of jobs, but at one of those points, I did reach a moment that I think the modern phrase would be burnout. Probably at the time it was labeled more of a kind of nervous breakdown or whatever you want to call it. But the classic needed counselling, needed medication, needing very other things, because I'm incredibly simplifying it, but frankly just did too much. And with two small kids and with education and with a pretty big job at that time, I just reached a point that my mind and my body were not capable of delivering what I was trying to push it through. And so that teaches you a lesson. It's a lesson I then hope others don't learn. And so as I, fortunately enough, got back to a place I could carry on and build my career and have my career momentum continue, frankly, probably, there was then a wellbeing thread added through it. Both inwardly and outwardly. So I will protect a big chunk of my diary to make sure I've got time to relax and time to think, and I'll do activities. And I find personally running for me makes a huge difference. I was working away outside the country last week and was able to fit in getting to park run, which is really good. I find that's an organisation that really encourages people to get out and physically do good things. And linking back to one of our programs at work, that gives people vitality points that gets them prizes that they can work. So I think the whole thing is linked together. I don't think work-life balance means how do you fit the two around each other. It is how are they balanced? How do they intertwine? So if I want to go for a run in the day, I'll do it. It'll be visible to people because we've got an Equiniti Strava account so everyone can see what you're doing. But equally, if it makes me feel good to do some emails at night, I'll do that as well. So it's about keeping things in balance and ensuring you should always remember, businesses are important and in this job, but in many of the ones below and particularly in middle management, there's always going to be occasions you have to do a lot of hours. You've got to work hard. Let's not pretend that doesn't happen, but it is then about how you make sure you take the downtime. I talked about having a supportive CEO. Myself and our group CEO, we regularly broadcast to the whole organisation. On a number of occasions, we've reminded people there's no prizes for getting to the end of the year and having a big pile of your holiday left. So we will actively talk to people about the fact that we're monitoring how much is being used in the organisation, and very often we've gone, it's not enough, and we know it's busy. And we know people are often not taking it because they think that's good for clients. But truthfully, if you create the space to get the time off, when you come back, you'll do a better job for the clients because you're rested and relaxed and so on. So it's about flex, but we are very keen to push that message and let people know it's right to have a life. That's kind of the aim of the game.
Thank you for sharing. That's really inspiring. And thank you for taking it so personal. That we really appreciate that. I know many people out there will really appreciate that. So such an amazing career and really inspiring and inspirational. Are there any hints and tips? We talk about the middle management or graduates who, or people perhaps early on where they're perhaps doing their GCSEs or A-levels and they're a little bit unsure or they're not sure whether they should go down the vocational route, like an apprenticeship scheme. Any hints or tips for people either climbing the ladder or just starting to climb the ladder from your perspective?
I think a few bits, and everyone's journey is different. And I've been incredibly fortuitous at points in my career. And I think, maybe the biggest success where I've had success is whatever you think success is, has come from I've had brilliant teams to work with and around. And so be a people person. It sounds easy in HR, but fundamentally it is much easier to achieve things if you're in an aligned, engaged team than it is if you're trying to get out there and do stuff on your own. You can do that for so far, but it runs out of road pretty quickly. So I think it's be involved with people and realize that people are people. I think, you should massively be curious to find out what's going on, whether that's in your team's lives, not being nosy, but just taking an interest, but so you can understand what motivates them and to help them, but how the business works. It's really easy as the business gets busy and as your job gets busy to kind of entrench yourself in a single task. And so just make sure you get your head up and you be curious about what's going on about the organization. I think don't be afraid to say no. Too often as you're building a career, people try and take on too much stuff. That's bad for well-being, but it's actually bad for delivery as well. And more often than you think if you say no to management in a sensible way with a sensible reason, that's fine. So you know, I think people should get better at pushing back. Despite, you know, the theme of this podcast, as it were, from back at the start, James, I would advocate for lifelong learning. And I think, you know, people should get out there and, you know, it doesn't have to be formal qualifications, although they massively have a place and are massively useful. But, you know, we provide as a business LinkedIn Learning to every single member of our team all around the globe. And that's an unbelievable resource to be able to go out and take learning on board and to learn new skills. And so I think people should keep building up their momentum and their skill set. That helps. But probably my biggest summary of all of it is just go with your gut. If something feels right, then that's probably the best decision to go with. And so I think that's where I'd go with.
Fantastic. One last question before we close. So obviously you're a CPO at the top of your game, and you know, you fell into HR. You didn't know what HR was initially. There are a lot of people out there that want to become CPOs, and they may be heads of HR, you know, senior HR business partners, and they don't know how to get there. And they're probably watching this and saying, oh, so how did Andy get? What advice would you give to anyone who wants to become a CPO specifically?
I think there's two different scenarios. So firstly, if you're in an organization that doesn't have a CPO role, then just write down what you think it looks like and go and pitch it to the people who could make that happen. That's genuinely my first bit of advice. There's a difference between functionally leading HR as a HRD and being the people representative across the business. And I think in most organizations of a certain size, there's space for it. So if the job doesn't exist, then you know, frankly, you should go and make a pitch as to why you could do that and what value it would add. Clearly, if there is a CPO in place, then, you know, have an open and transparent conversation with them about what their plans are and how long they're going to be there and what they think you need to do to get into the job role. And then you should make a decision as a team as to whether there is a way you can complement each other and work together and take over. But equally, if that person's not going anywhere for a while, then maybe a bit like I thought my path was back at the start, maybe the right answer is to move on. And that might need to be a sideways step to get you into a different organization. But I think it's just ask the questions and be very transparent about the fact that you want that role and what you could bring to it. And most organizations will be receptive and good leaders will be receptive. You know, I'm super proud of the people who've worked for me who were, you know, in this sort of job and other big jobs. And many of them are probably doing a better job than I am, almost unquestionably. And I'm super proud of those people. And I'm glad for whatever I've contributed to their kind of journey.
So Andy, thank you for today. Is there anything from your side that you'd like to cover off that we haven't asked today?
I think I'd just say to people, you know, given the theme of this organization, be confident in your own ability. You know, be very confident of what you contribute to an organization. And particularly if you're in the field that I'm in and you're in HR and you're a people person, just be confident that this is a function that not only does the right thing for people, and that is hugely important, and I will always advocate for that, but actually don't be afraid that this is a commercial function that adds brilliant value to an organization. And sometimes it can be easy to be deferential to other functions, particularly things like finance. And people should have the confidence to go, this profession lives at the top table as much as others do. And therefore advocate for the right things because it will be good for business.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So Andy, thank you today for your time. And James, also thank you as well. And if anyone's watching and if you have any questions for Andy or ourselves, feel free to reach out and don't forget to subscribe. And thank you for today. And thank you for tuning in.